Hello, hello, and welcome back to my channel. How are you? I am so happy to see you today. As today we have another true crime ASMR video for you, featuring my cup of coffee. So, today we will be discussing one of my favorite cases. This case I think is so interesting. There's been so many theories about what actually happened, and a lot of cinematic adaptations, which is quite surprising since this occurred in 1892. So, today we will be discussing the Borden murders. On August 4th, 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were found hacked to death in their Fall River, Massachusetts home. Andrew Borden was discovered in a pool of blood on the living room couch, his face nearly split in two. Abby was upstairs, her head smashed to pieces. It would later be determined that Abby was murdered first. Suspicions of who could have committed the crime began, and those suspicions would fall on one of Andrew Borden's own children, Lizzie Borden. So, today we will be breaking down this case and some of the theories of what happened. I will be adding this video to my True Crime ASMR series playlist. This is where you can find past and future videos in this series. I will be doing some voiceovers with some sounds today. We will try and keep all of the loud sounds for the beginning of this video and gradually go down to whispers and the silent, well, as silent as it can be, portions of this video for your tingly pleasure. So, let's get into it. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July 19th, 1860, in Fall River, Massachusetts, to Sarah Anthony Borden and Andrew Jackson Borden. Now, I have never seen someone take their father's name as their middle name before. I tried to look this up. I guess it was fairly common back then. Lizzie's father, Andrew, grew up in very modest surroundings and struggled financially as a young man. He would eventually go on to prosper in the manufacture and sale of furniture and caskets. He would go on to be a very successful property developer. He was also the director of several textile mills and owned considerable commercial property. He was also the president of the Union Savings Bank. At the time of his death, Andrew Borden's estate was valued at $330,000, which would equate to $10.1 million now. The family was very wealthy, to say the least. Andrew, despite being so wealthy, was known for being very frugal, to the point where he cut corners where he could. This included skipping out on indoor plumbing. Lizzie and her older sister, Emma Lenora Borden, had a relatively religious upbringing. Lizzie was known to be involved in her church, and she would assist in teaching Sunday school to children of recent immigrants to the U.S. Lizzie's mother, Sarah, would die in 1863. 3 years after her death, Andrew would marry Abby Durfee Gray. Abby helped raise Lizzie and her older sister, Emma. The sisters reportedly despised her, and as adults argued with their father over money matters. Abby's family were really trying to, as an outsider looking in, it just seems like Abby was trying to make it so her family would be very wealthy as well. But by this time, Abby had been in the family for many years. Her and Lizzie's father, Andrew, had gone together when Lizzie was probably 3 years old, I would think. I believe she was only 3. She was born in 1860 and they got married in 1863. So she was 3 years old. So, I mean, we see this often with stepmothers, I think. But anyway, in May 1892, Andrew had killed multiple pigeons in his barn with a hatchet, believing they were attracting local children to hunt them. This may not seem very, valid for the case, but this act is depicted in everything that I read, everything that I've seen about the Borden murders. Lizzie had recently acquired this fondness for pigeons and had recently built a roost for the pigeons. And it has been commonly recounted that she was upset over his killing of them. The family would go on to have an argument in July of 1892. At this point, both the Borden daughters were living with Andrew and his wife Abby. This argument led to both sisters taking extended vacations in Bedford after returning to Fall River a week before the murders. Lizzie had actually chose to stay in the local rooming house for 4 additional days before returning to the Borden residence. Tension had been growing within the Borden family in the months before the murders, especially over Andrew's gifts of real estate to various branches of Abby's family. Now, both the Borden women, the daughters, Lizzie was 32 at this time, and they were struggling to marry her off. This is during the time where women were like cattle. You would sell your daughter to be married to kind of get more money, really. So, he and Andrew had been gifting parts of his estate to various branches in Abby's family. After their stepmother's sister received a house, the sisters demanded and received a rental property, the home they had lived in until their mother died, which they purchased from their father for $1. A few weeks before the murders, they sold the property back to their father for $5,000, which is $170,000 in 2023 money. Makes sense with our market, doesn't it? The night before the murders, John Vinica Morse, Lizzie and Emma's uncle on Abby's side, was invited to stay for a few days to discuss business matters with Andrew. Which it's widely speculated that these conversations that John had come to have with Andrew were again about property transfer. At this point, I think Andrew was really trying to think of ways to continue his legacy and his family. But I think that this only aggravated an already tense situation. For several days before the murders, the entire household had been violently ill. It was speculated that the family had been poisoned. Andrew was not a well-liked man in society in Massachusetts. Abby had feared poison, given that Andrew had not been popular. It was also speculated that Lizzie, a look-alike, is what they came to deduce about it, but it was speculated that a woman that looked quite like Lizzie had gotten hyaluronic acid, a watered-down batch of it, at the local drugstore. And this was back in the day when you could buy anything over the counter. So, now, we are going to dive into the events that occurred on the day of August 4th, 1892. Abby's brother John Morse had arrived the night before and had slept in the guest room. After breakfast, with Abby, Andrew, and the Borden's maid, Bridget Sullivan, Andrew and John went to the sitting room. They would be chatting for nearly an hour. John would then leave around 8:48 a.m. And he had planned to return to the Borden home for lunch at noon. He had plans and dinner with Andrew that evening. Around 9 a.m., Andrew Borden would leave the home for a morning walk. Although the cleaning of the guest room was one of Lizzie and Emma's regular chores, Abby had gone upstairs sometime between 9 a.m. and 10:30 to make the bed. According to the forensic investigation, Abby was facing her killer at the time of the attack. She was first struck on the side of the head with a hatchet, which cut her just above the ear, causing her to turn and fall face down on the floor. This would create contusions on her nose and forehead. Her killer then struck her multiple times, delivering 17 more direct hits to the back of her head, and would kill her. When Andrew returned at around 10:30 a.m., the front door was locked. His key failed to open the door, so he ended up having to knock. Bridget would then unlock the door, finding that the door was actually jammed. Bridget would later testify that she heard Lizzie laughing immediately after trying to open this door. Bridget was cursing. She was trying to open the door, and she hears Lizzie Borden laughing. She didn't see Lizzie, but stated that the laughter was coming from the top of the stairs. This was considered significant, as Abby was already dead by this time, and her body was very visible to anyone on the home's second floor. Lizzie would later deny being upstairs and testified that her father had asked her where Abby was, to which she replied that a messenger had delivered Abby a summons to visit a sick friend. Bridget stated that she had then removed Andrew's boots and helped him in his slippers before he would lay down on the sofa for a nap. This detail was contradicted by the crime scene photos Andrew was still wearing his boots. She testified that she was in her third floor room, resting from cleaning windows, when just before 11:10 a.m., she heard Lizzie call from downstairs. And Lizzie would be screaming, "Maggie, come quick. Father's dead. Somebody came and killed him." Andrew was slumped on the couch in the downstairs sitting room, struck 10 or 11 times with a hatchet-like weapon. One of his eyes had been split cleanly in two, suggesting that he had been asleep when attacked. His still bleeding wounds suggested it was a very recent attack. Dr. Bowen, the family's physician, arrived from his home across the street and pronounced both victims dead. Detectives estimated that Andrew's death had occurred at approximately 11 a.m. Lizzie's initial answers to the police were at times strange and contradictory. Initially, she reported hearing a groan or a scraping noise or a distress call before entering the house. 2 hours later, she told police she had heard nothing and entered the house, not realizing that anything was wrong. When asked where her stepmother was, she recounted Abby receiving the note. She also stated that she thought Abby had returned and asked if someone could go upstairs and look for her. Bridget and a neighbor, Mrs. Churchill, were halfway up the stairs, their eyes level with the floor, when they looked into the guest room and saw Abby lying face down on the floor. Most of the officers who interviewed Lizzie reported that they disliked her attitude. Some said she was too calm and poised for having her stepmother and father hacked to death. Despite her behavior and changing alibis, she was not checked for bloodstains. Police did search her room, but it was a really bad inspection. The cops weren't very good at protecting the evidence. At the trial, they admitted to not doing a proper search because Lizzie had fallen ill. They were subsequently criticized for their lack of diligence in this case. In the basement, police found 2 hatchets, 2 axes, and a hatchet head with a broken handle. The hatchet head was suspected of being the murder weapon, as the break in the handle appeared fresh, and the ash and dust on the head, unlike that on the other bladed tools, appeared to have been deliberately applied to make it look as if it had been in the basement for some time. However, none of these tools were removed from the house. Because of the mysterious illness that had stricken the household before the murders, the family's milk and the victims' stomachs removed during autopsies performed in the Borden dining room, which is so gross. I can't imagine how traumatizing this was for Lizzie to have her. I mean, she didn't like Abby, but she had grown up with Abby since she was 3. And to have her dad and her just cut open on her dining room table. Anyway, their stomachs were tested for poison, but none was found. Residents suspected Lizzie of purchasing hydrocyanic acid in a diluted form from the local druggist. Her defense was that she inquired about the acid in order to clean furs, despite the local medical examiner's testimony that it did not have antiseptic properties. He basically disputed that she couldn't have used it for furs. Anyway, Lizzie and Emma's friend, Alice Russell, decided to stay with his sisters the night following the murders, while John spent the night in the attic guest room, contrary to later accounts that he slept in the murder site guest room. Police were stationed around the house on the night of August 4th, during which an officer said he had seen Lizzie enter the cellar with Alice Russell carrying a kerosene lamp and a slop pail. He stated he saw both women exit the cellar, after which Lizzie returned alone. Though he was unable to see what she was doing, he stated it appeared she was bent over a sink. Miss Borden, just incriminating yourself, my dear. On August 5th, John Morse would leave the Borden residence and was mobbed by hundreds of people. Now, in 1892, this case was huge. At this time, Andrew Borden was kind of like the Donald Trump of Fall River, Massachusetts. He was very wealthy. He had his hands in many things in the town. And they had their eyes on the Borden family prior to this. So media coverage back then was all eyes on the Bordens. So after John Morse had left the Borden residence, he was mobbed by hundreds of people. Police had to escort him back to the house. The following day, police conducted a more thorough search of the house. 2 days after the murder. Makes sense, doesn't it? Inspecting the sisters' clothing and confiscating the broken-handled hatchet head 2 days later. Anyway, that evening, a police officer and the mayor visited the house, and Lizzie was informed that she was a suspect in the murders. The next morning, Russell entered the kitchen to find Borden tearing up a dress. This was Alice Russell, her friend. And Lizzie had explained that she was planning to put it on the fire because it was covered in paint. It was never determined whether it was the dress she had been wearing the day of the murders. Lizzie appeared at the inquest, which an inquest is basically a summons where you defend yourself. The inquest hearing was on August 8th. Her request to have her family attorney present was refused, under a state statute providing that an inquest must be held in private. So you need to be in private for you to incriminate yourself. She had been prescribed regular doses of morphine. This was during the time when amphetamines and morphine were given for nerves. This was just to calm her, and it is possible that her testimony was affected by this. Yeah. Her behavior was erratic, shocker, and she often refused to answer a question, even if the answer would be beneficial to her. She often contradicted herself and provided alternating accounts of the morning, such as saying she was in the kitchen reading a magazine when her father arrived home. She would then switch it to she was in the dining room doing some ironing, and then saying she was coming down the stairs. The district attorney was very aggressive and confrontational to Lizzie. On August 11th, Lizzie was served with a warrant of arrest and jailed. The inquest testimony, the basis for the modern debate regarding Lizzie's guilt or innocence, was later ruled inadmissible at her trial in June 1893. During this time, as I said, the media coverage was just overwhelming about the Bordens, and especially Lizzie. So they would just tear apart her character and demeanor during these instances, saying that she wasn't very sad. They would even say she bit her lips, flushed, and bent toward Attorney Adams. A lot of the time they were trying to make Lizzie out to be this floozy as well. It was also reported that the testimony provided in the inquest had caused a change of opinion among Lizzie's friends, who have strongly maintained her innocence. The inquest received significant press attention nationwide. Not right now. Thank you. Go. Including an extensive 3-page write-up in the Boston Globe. A grand jury began hearing evidence on November 7th, and Borden was indicted on December 2nd. Lizzie's trial took place in New Bedford, starting on June 5th, 1893. Prosecuting attorneys were Jose Knowlton and future United States Supreme Court Justice William Moody. William H. Moody was huge back then. The defending attorney was Andrew V. Jennings, Melvin Adams, and former Massachusetts Governor George D. Robinson. 5 days before the trial's commencement, on June 1st, another axe murder would occur in Fall River. This time, the victim was Bertha Manchester, who was found hacked to death in her kitchen. The similarities between the Manchester and Borden murders were striking and noted by jurors. Jose Correia de Mello, who was a Portuguese immigrant, was later convicted of the Manchester's murder in 1894 and was determined not to have been in the vicinity of Fall River at the time of the Borden murders. Maybe this man thought that he could pin these murders on Lizzie as well. I'm not sure. A prominent point of discussion in the trial and press coverage of it was the hatchet head found in the basement, which was not convincingly demonstrated by the prosecution to be the murder weapon. Prosecutors argued that the killer had removed the handle because it would have been covered in blood. One officer testified that a hatchet handle was found near the hatchet head, but another officer contradicted this. Though no bloody clothing was found at the scene, Russell testified, Alice Russell, that on August 8th she had witnessed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove, saying it had been ruined when she brushed against wet paint. During the course of the trial, the defense never attempted to challenge this statement. They never really mention the part where the officer watched Alice Russell and Lizzie go in the basement either. The investigators for this whole thing were just not. I genuinely want to know if this was their first time, honestly. Now, Lizzie's presence at the home was also a point of dispute during the trial. According to testimony, Sullivan had entered the second floor at around 10:58 a.m. and left Lizzie and her father downstairs. Lizzie told several people that at this time she went into the barn and was not in the house for 20 minutes to possibly a half hour. Hyman Lubinsky testified for the defense that he saw Lizzie leaving the barn at 11:03 a.m. And another witness, Charles Gardner, confirmed that she had left way before she said she did. He confirmed at 11:10 a.m. Lizzie called Sullivan downstairs, told her Andrew had been murdered, and ordered her not to enter the room. Instead, Lizzie sent Bridget to go get the doctor. Both victims' heads had been removed during autopsy, and the skulls were admitted as evidence during the trial and presented on June 5th, 1893. Upon seeing them in the courtroom, Lizzie would faint. I don't know what they really expected her to do. I think the defense probably wanted this to come forward so that it could show that Lizzie had some emotion about what happened to Abby and Andrew. But she had fainted. Evidence was excluded that she had sought to purchase prussic acid for cleaning the furs from the local druggist. The judge ruled that the incident was too remote in time to have any connection. It was also disputed if it was Lizzie at all. Before it was sent to deliberate on June 20th, 1893. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury acquitted Lizzie Borden of the murders, which she had stated after to the reporters that she was the happiest woman in the world, which you would be too if you got $300K from your father's death. Now, I don't know if anybody else had this time in school where I studied this case in school. I remember reading a book, and in this book they stated that Lizzie was laughing and having this maniacal laugh after being acquitted. And now when I'm looking all this up, I don't know if my memory made this up or what, but I don't see accounts of that anywhere. I'm just not sure. Was that even real? I don't know. But after her acquittal, Lizzie and her older sister Emma briefly returned to the house, but soon purchased a 14-room Queen Anne style home on the hill, which they named Maplecroft. The now wealthy sisters lived the life Lizzie had always dreamed of, with a large staff of servants and all the modern conveniences of the day, including an indoor plumbing. They also built a lavish monument, which they placed at the site of Andrew and Abby's graves. Lizzie began using the name Lizbeth, and while she may have hoped for a fresh start, Fall River refused to allow her to forget her past. Maplecroft became a target for school children who threw objects at the house and regularly pranked and taunted Lizzie. Former friends, including Miss Russell, and even fellow church members avoided her. she was accused but not charged of shoplifting while visiting Rhode Island, leading her to become even more isolated within the walls of Maplecroft. Lizzie would become a frequent goer to the theaters in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. During her time at the theater, she met an actress named Nance O'Neill. In 1904, rumors were spiraling about Miss Lizzie again, but about her and Nance being sexually intertwined. Nance's friendship with Lizzie ended after just a few years, but Lizzie and her staunchest supporter remained estranged for the rest of their lives. Lizzie died in June 1927 at the age of 66, and Emma would die a little more than a week later. So, that is the case of the Borden murders. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. There are many theories on what happened that day, and let's dive into those. So, theory number 1. Many accounts were made of a wild-eyed man lurking the grounds. Lizzie had even told police that she had seen a wild-eyed man lurking. Several locals reported seeing the same man, and they all matched Lizzie's description in the vicinity later that day. Another theory, which is a widely popular theory, I don't agree with it personally. There was a movie with Kristen Stewart, and I believe she plays Bridget. But the theory is that Lizzie and Bridget, the maid, were having an affair. In this scenario, Abby Borden discovers the relationship and threatens to tell Lizzie's father, prompting Lizzie to kill her stepmother in order to prevent that from happening. But Lizzie really loved her father, so I don't think she would be capable of killing him or being behind that. Plus, I don't know about you, but it seems the whole time of this case, Bridget was trying to pin everything on Lizzie. I just don't think that this was what happened, personally. Another theory is that the maid did it, which I personally think Bridget was at least involved. Some people have speculated Bridget as guilty for the crime because she was being mistreated by her employers. We'll get more into that later. Now, there was new information that was brought forward by Arnold Brown's book, which was that Andrew Borden had actually had an illegitimate son, William Borden, whom everyone in the family knew about, but he was never discussed. Just prior to the murders, both Lizzie and Emma had been angry with their father, who was apparently planning to disperse his fortune via his will in ways that would not be too great of a benefit to them. With changes to the will looming, Lizzie contacted William, her estranged brother, to ask him for his help in persuading their father against it. Arnold Brown in his book speculated that William, not being a very sound mind, had a particular hatred for Abby, whom he saw as having taken the place of his own mother, who should have married Andrew Borden. Now, while Andrew was waiting for Mr. Borden to return from town so that he could confront his father about the will, something ignited his fury. This could possibly be Abby mocking him or telling him he had no chance receiving an inheritance. And in his rage, he killed her with a hatchet that he carried with him at all times in a burlap bag. This time, people were just bringing hatchets. There was no pepper spray. They brought a hatchet, bang, bang, that's it. After killing Abby, William would wait for Mr. Borden to return to the house. When he did so, Andrew confronted his father. They argued. Mr. Borden likely dismissed him and turned his back and laid on the sofa, ignoring the agitated William. And this time, William killed him. So, which there are many people who kind of say that William was the wild-eyed man and Lizzie was just protecting him as her brother, because it's very clear the man already had a terrible life as his father, not really acknowledging him as his son. So, now that we are at the part of the video where I tell you my thoughts. So, I personally think at the very end of the day, I do think Bridget was involved. There's no doubt in my mind that she was involved. But I personally think that Bridget was having an affair with William Borden. I think that her and William knew what the daughters had to gain and knew Bridget is a maid. She heard everything in that house. This is a time when people were nosier than most. There were no phones. There was gossip columns. Everything was firsthand. As you can see in this case, all eyes were on the Bordens, as it was. I think if Bridget and William were not at least having an affair, that they did this together. I think Lizzie loved her father way too much to kill him. I do think that she was in fact in the barn catering to her pigeons, and came in to find the scene. Bridget was sleeping the entire time. Bridget was in the house. Abby, when she was murdered, she was facing her killer. I don't think you can be fast enough to not at least make a sound. And with a hatchet, I'm sorry to be pretty nasty here, but it would have made a sound. Just the smashing into the body, it would have made a sound, and it would have been a nasty sound. There were no AirPods, there were no headphones. Bridget was downstairs washing windows when Abby was murdered. She heard something. And plus, the blood. Whoever did that had to have been covered. The splatter, you had to have been covered. And the only way down is down the stairs, right past the dining room, unless this person hid upstairs. I think that William and Bridget planned to pin the entire murder on the sisters, and William, knowing that he was his father's only son, hoped to pin it on them so that he would get an inheritance. At this point, the will was not finalized, so right now it was going to the next of kin. That is what I think happened. And I had never really heard of this William Borden. They really did hide him very well. But before you go, I would like to recommend a TV show, the Lizzie Borden Chronicles. I loved that take on the Borden murders. I absolutely love Christina Ricci. She plays the original Wednesday Addams. She's in Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp. She is amazing as an actress. And she was phenomenal in that TV show. In that show, they make the most interesting take on it. And I won't spoil it for you, but it is very interesting. And I highly recommend it. So, thank you so much for watching. I love our times hanging out together. I hope that you enjoyed this video very much. I will be adding this video, as always, to my True Crime ASMR video playlist. This is where you can find past and future videos in this series. I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit here and talk true crime with me. I enjoy it very much. I'm so happy to be sitting here and present with you again. It's been too long. I will be uploading a update video, just kind of going through all the things that kept me from sitting here with you, what's been going on in my life, and all that fun stuff. So I hope to see you in that video. So